Ibrahim Traoré is a young military officer who rose to become Burkina Faso's de facto leader and who, for many citizens, is a sign of urgent hope for decisive change. He seized control in September 2022 by ousting Paul Henry Damiba, who had himself earlier displaced the civilian presidency. And so that chain of abrupt transfers makes Traore's rise feel less like an isolated event and more like a national reset born of frustration with repeated failures. Ground level supporters describe him as a captain who answered a security emergency, who prioritizes sovereignty over external dictates, and who frames his role as stewardship to restore state capacity today. Burkina Faso faces jihadist insurgencies that have displaced millions and eroded trust in prior administrations. And Traore's anti colonial stance and pivot from France to new partners energize yearning for self reliance. Supporters elevate him as a Sangara like figure, and mass rallies, volunteer patriotism, grassroots fundraising, and small business investments fuel projects from like local electrical vehicles to new malls and luxury apartment blocks, along with new road developments. This mixture of optimistic civic energy and risky military governance produces a paradox where citizens build, hope, and pay as rights are constrained and the world watches whether renewal will endure. Traore's rhetoric rejects dependence on former colonial powers and insists that Burkina Faso must reclaim economic and security autonomy through local initiative, through strategic partnerships, and also youth participation in national building, or rather, national rebuilding. He has publicly criticized French military presence and sought new security arrangements that he argues will better address local insurgencies, framing those shifts as necessary as necessary corrections rather than partisan gestures. Domestic initiatives emphasize food sovereignty, small industry, and decentralized energy projects so that the villages and towns can begin producing and powering themselves. A pivot that supporters say builds local community resilience. So, visible projects cited by citizens include new solar farms, housing developments around Ouagadougou, and industrial workshops producing components for electric vehicles, which supporters present as evidence of a developmental turn. Even if reports exaggerate the scale, the symbolic value of an electric vehicle launch and new retail and luxury housing projects has convinced residents that the country is shifting from despair toward enterprise. For those, willingness to pay extra taxes or volunteer labor for communal projects is not mere nostalgia, but investment into a future where local industry and self sufficiency replace dependency today. Many young Burkinabé see Traoré as a break with gerontocratic politics today and praise his presence, they praise his rhetoric and insistence that ordinary people should have a direct role in national revival. Public rallies and community meetings organized spontaneously, they display banners and chants and local communities that coordinate small-scale projects demonstrating a civic enthusiasm that often contradicts with elite skepticism on the ground. The Itaoa electric vehicle launch has been touted as a sign of industrial ambition. Analysts debate scale and origins, yet many locals treat it as a concrete emblem of progress. Beyond symbolic projects, small manufacturers and entrepreneurs describe an increase in orders, in partnerships, and willingness from diaspora investors to fund local workshops, which creates a feedback loop of visibility and investment. People describe paying additional levies or volunteer labor for infrastructure not because of coercion, but because they perceive a shared project of recovery that promises jobs and dignity and future. Analysts warn that enthusiasm does not erase constraints and such as security shortfalls, limited fiscal capacity, and the danger that a charismatic leader may centralize power at the expense of institutions. Traoré's foreign policy gestures, from distancing Burkina Faso from French military operations to seeking new ties, including the likes of Russia, are framed as assertions of independence to reconfigure partnerships and avoid replicating old dependencies. Regional responses vary, with some neighbors cautious and international observers concerned, yet domestically, the pivot attracts a core of Pan African voices who celebrate an end to perceived neo colonial tutelage today. Investments in renewable energy projects such as the Donson and PA solar initiatives and, and expanding grid capacity are tangible steps to reduce import dependence and stabilize power for industry today. So, solar farms, mini grids, and local manufacturing hubs reduce the logistics burden of attracting industry. And supporters argue that they are foundational for producing components like batteries and vehicle parts domestically today. Critically, donors and some international firms remain wary, offering conditional finance or withdrawing altogether. But Traore's government leverages alternative partners and diaspora networks to bridge gaps identified by conventional investors today. The geopolitics are messy with risk of isolation, but for many citizens, the immediate concern is safety, jobs, and dignity, and they judge leaders by those deliverables, not diplomatic rankings. Critics warn that military rule carries the risk of repression. International organizations highlight press freedom issues, abuses maybe by security forces, and suspension of democratic norms under the junta today. And human rights groups point to incidents of arbitrary detention, restrictions on media, and intimidation of opponents. And these reports shape international pressure, which can limit access to conventional development finance. But at the same time, many citizens trade civil liberties for perceived improvements in security and livelihoods. And they base that bargain on experience of fewer attacks and steadier supply chains. The challenge for Traore is in institutionalizing gains so that short term civic mobilization becomes long term capacity. And that requires transparent budgets, maybe accountable security institutions, and real decentralization of power. Without institutional reforms, civic enthusiasm can calcify into personality cults while economic progress stalls. And the risk is why analysts admonish the government and citizens to demand transparent metrics today. The positive momentum in markets, in solar energy, in housing, and small industry is persuasive to many locals. But maybe it should be anchored by rule of law and civic institutions to endure. Ultimately, Ibrahim Traore's story is both a local drama and a broader question about how fragile states reinvent themselves under pressure. And it resists simplistic labels of hero or villain. Ample evidence of citizen enthusiasm appears in rallies and in civic volunteering, diaspora investment, and grassroots contributions to projects that many locals describe as practical nation building rather than propaganda and everyday courage. When residents report new factories, new solar panels, and pilot electric vehicles being made or assembled locally, those claims deserve examination, but also a tempered admiration for ambition and initiative today. Proponents argue that practical deliverables such as schools and roads and factories and energy change incentives quicker than speeches, and that citizens rightly reward leaders who produce measurables that tangibly improve household life in the present. Traore's challenge is to convert civic enthusiasm into durable institutions while keeping security gains intact. So short-term popularity matters only if it results in sustainable governance for the nation. So in short, on-the-ground enthusiasm, reports of new economic activity, and the refusal by many to flee their homes are positive and encouraging signs that a different narrative is taking hold for now in Ibrahim's favor.